The first thing was the smell, sweet, resinous, wrong in the way memory is wrong when it insists on being beautiful as it dies. The fire in the living room licked slow at the edges of something glossy, and the gloss folded into itself like a smile losing nerve. I sat in the old armchair with its velvet rubbed thin where my fingers had learned to fret, and the glass in my hand scalded down a path the flames had already traced in me. Any other night, this fire might have been a tender confession. Tonight, it was an execution. The album went first because it had promised forever in thick paper and thicker vows. The lamplight made the room look patient and civilized, as if it didn't know it was witnessing a dismembering. Wedding photos curled like dried leaves, each page surrendering to orange with the dignity of something that had never imagined it could be ash. I had learned a new grammar, the verbs of endings: burn, sever, unmake. Emily's keys always stuttered in the lock before they turned, a tiny staccato of her life arriving. Tonight they sang that same bright note at the door, the note that had once meant home, groceries, jokes shouted from the hallway, the casual goodness of two people keeping each other company through the aging of days. "Hey babe, I missed you," she called, heels tapping like punctuation across the hardwood, her voice sugar with lemon, bright enough to hide the rind. She kicked off her shoes with a sigh and tossed her bag onto the sofa, the way she'd always done, the familiar choreography of habit that almost made me doubt what I knew. "Almost? Did you have a good trip?" I asked, watching the fire take a corner of us and make it into smoke. My voice sounded like a stranger trying on my face. She hesitated, then found a performance. "Productive." "Exhausting?" A little laugh. "You wouldn't believe the meetings." She moved into the kitchen, cupboards opening and closing like unblinking eyes, and the scent of coffee grounds rushed out to stand in the doorway between us. She noticed the fire only when the air changed, a sift of something floral turning bitter. "What is that smell?" she asked, a wrinkle of confusion becoming a narrow in her eyes. I tipped my chin toward the hearth. "Go look." She crossed the room slowly, as if afraid of spooking whatever was alive in the flames. "What the hell is this?" Her voice broke soft at the end, a string pulled too tight. In the firelight, there we were. A garden of dead promises, the dried bouquet from our wedding day surrendering petal by fragile petal, the edges blackening into lace. The letters we'd written with our best selves lay like cattle before the slaughter, ribbon unfurling like a vein. The glossy page in the fire was the photo of her leaning into me, sunshot and laughing, and I remembered the exact temperature of that laugh against my throat. "It seemed fitting," I said, and the syllables cooled in the air like stones skipping across a lake to sink. "These things don't mean much anymore." Her face tilted toward me, and the fire drew high bones and secrets from her features, casting shadows that didn't belong to either of us. "Have you lost your mind?" "No," I said, standing, setting my glass down with care, the way one sets down the one fragile thing in a house of shattering. For the first time in days, everything is clear. I pulled my phone from my pocket and let the screen glow in my palm. The photos waited there, lit with the same pale light as hospital rooms. I held them up, texts in the evidential blue and gray of modern betrayal, a hotel booking with two names hiding behind confirmation numbers, a sequence of plans threaded through days that I had watered with trust. Her mouth opened and closed, the way it does when a lie looks in the mirror and understands what a face is for. "It's not what it looks like," she tried, and the sentence arrived with such earnest exhaustion that for a heartbeat I wanted to catch it before it hit the floor. "Really?" I said, and the laugh that came out of me was a brittle thing, a twig that snaps too loudly because the forest around it is quiet, because it looks like you have been sleeping with a man named Greg while I was busy loving you. "It was a mistake," she blurted, the word mistake cuffed to loneliness as if they were both orphans. "You've been so distant." The word found all the places in me I had once stood between her and the rain. "I have been building a life," I said slowly, carefully, as if explaining arithmetic to a child wearing a blindfold. "I gave you everything you asked for, except the thrill of breaking something good." Tears took her eyes, made them look larger, younger, like a promise had the power to take years off a face. "Please, we can fix this," she said, turning over the word "we" like a coin she hoped might still buy a future. "It didn't mean anything. You planned a trip," I said. "You booked a room. You wrote a script for lies and learned your lines." The fire crackled then, as if applauding. I paced because motion kept me from exploding into 100 small, loud truths. "When I found out," I said, "I wanted to confront you right away." I stopped at the mantel and lifted the envelope there, the one made of stiff, expensive paper that thinks of itself as a future. Then I realized the only courtesy worth offering was the one to myself. I set the envelope down on the table between us, the way a doctor puts an X-ray on the light box. I spoke to a lawyer. "The papers are drafted. There is evidence attached." Her face twisted, the way faces do when they see a knife has their name etched into the blade. "I also told Greg's wife." The room inhaled. You didn't, she said. I did, I said, and in the saying there was a piece I had not known for days. She deserved the truth more than either of us deserve a story that makes this hurt less. She sank down onto the rug, the envelope clutched close like maybe the paper could teach her how to pray. Please don't do this, I love you. You love the comfort, I said, and felt the exact spot in my chest where the words fit. You love the stability. You loved me until the day loyalty asked for your answer. I took my coat from the hook. Keys gathered in my palm, small and hard and honest. You have until the end of the week to move out, I said, the syllables steady as a tide chart. If you're not gone, I'll change the locks. Where are you going? She cried, and the question was so late it felt like a joke with bad timing. Anywhere but here, I said, and opened the door. Night surprised me with cool air, the kind that presses a hand to the back of the neck as if to say, breathe. The street was the same, the world still doing its ordinary work of being real. A dog barked 2 houses down, someone's television mumbled a game show, a car passed with the low hum of a tired apology. I walked until my breathing joined the night's, and each step loosened the knot behind my ribs. The house behind me grew smaller, like a lie told to fewer and fewer people. In the weeks that followed, the fire stayed a fire, and I learned to make it without ceremony. Friends came with casseroles and opinions. Family called with voices that sounded like quilts. I said thank you and meant it, but I did not step into their pity. I took back the small anchors, morning runs before sunrise, the guitar undusted from its corner, a sketchbook open to a page that had waited years to be touched. Emily moved out quietly, the way ghosts decide someone else's house might be more hospitable. Her messages thinned, then stopped. Last I heard, Greg's wife chose herself and left, and whatever wreckage he picked through alone. The fireplace still eats what I feed it, not keepsakes now, but ordinary logs that do their simple job of turning into heat. Betrayal burned my past into something fine enough to scatter, but ash is also mineral, also seed, and I has learned the choreography of rising. The night I burned our wedding, I thought I was ending a story. I was wrong. That was only the hook, the opening line, the breath before the plunge into everything the heart will dare after it has been singed and called alive anyway. The apartment had south-facing windows that spilled the after-lunch sun onto the floor, a milk-white blessing that made dust look like galaxies. I chose it because it did not know either of us, because the light ignored my name and simply existed, dependable in a way that people fail at when their hands learn the wrong temperature of love. On the second morning, I stood barefoot in the rectangle of warmth and counted my breaths while the kettle clicked itself toward boiling. Grief is a strange animal. It comes when fed and when starved. It does not care if the calendar insists on Tuesday or if the city is busy putting on its own performance of indifference. It sits on the chest and announces its weight with the smugness of something that knows the house is already built around it. The first week I left drawers open, cabinet doors ajar, as if making escape routes for the invisible. I ran until the air made a fist in my lungs. The river path held me because it didn't ask questions. It only offered the sound of water doing what it has always done: leave, return, carry. My feet learned to desire the ache of miles. My brain cooled under the repetition. The body bargains with pain by giving it jobs. When I stopped, I would lean over, hands on knees, and feel an emptiness like a vacant stage after a play. Somehow the quiet itself was applause. Nora showed up on a Sunday because she did not believe in letting silence do all the work. She had been my friend since the college days when ramen was a religion. She had a way of entering rooms like the truth does, without apologizing for the light it brings. She put a plant on my windowsill, a snake plant because you can't kill it even if you forget what water is. I won't say I told you so, she said, and then mercifully did not. Instead, we ate takeout from cartons that felt like props in a movie about people who have their lives together. Heard from her, Nora asked, not because she didn't know the answer, but because asking offered me a place to put my mouth. Not since the movers, I said, which feels like a mercy I didn't earn. Nora nodded. Sometimes mercy shows up overdressed. You open the door anyway. At night, the apartment made new sounds that wanted to be named. The elevator's cough, pipes talking like old men, the upstairs neighbor's footsteps mapping a secret life above mine. I lay awake and let my mind inventory what it had lost and what, stubbornly, it had kept. The mind is a museum with no closing hours. I toured exhibits I should have roped off, the rooftop in Florence at 26, her hair in wind, the first apartment where we ate dinner on the floor. The way she used to sleep with one hand under her cheek, like she was listening to the earth. The therapist's office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the plush resignation of rugs. Dr. Malik had kind eyes and a pencil that clicked too often. I forgave the pencil because his questions were gentle as sand. What do you want now? He asked, not like a challenge but like an altar. The words came slow. I want something that isn't her absence. We talked about intention, how mine had been simple and honest, to build a life with someone who would meet me in the middle and call it our country. We talked about obstacle, how hers had been a hunger with no edges, and mine had become the fatigue of always being the adult in the room where love was playing with matches. You can be strong and also tired, Dr. Malik said. You can leave and also grieve the leaving. I wrote it down because sometimes wisdom needs ink to stay put. Greg's wife, her name was Alana, emailed me once, a short note that read like a hand squeezed twice. Once for pain, once for solidarity. She thanked me for telling her, and then apologized for thanking me, as if gratitude was an insult to the ruin. I answered the only way I knew how, with a wish for her peace, and we left each other alone in the privacy of our separate wreckages. Nights sharpened into their own religion. I learned to sit in the dark and trust that morning would keep its appointment. On a Tuesday, I failed that trust, and at 2:13 a.m. called a number I shouldn't. It rang once, twice, then the machine, her voice offering to take a message that would change nothing. I hung up and put my phone on the other side of the room like it was a live wire. On Friday, the sky opened with rain that smelled like iron. I walked in it without an umbrella because there are baptisms that have nothing to do with religion. The city softened, faces tilted upward. Strangers were briefly forgiven for being strangers. I thought of the night I burned our wedding and realized the truest thing wasn't the fire, it was the choice. A week later, I found the box at the back of my closet labeled before. Inside, postcards from places I promised myself. A concert ticket from a band I loved before life required me to be so reasonable. A half-finished sketch of a woman reading on a train. I sharpened a pencil and gave her a mouth. When the line was right, I felt a small, exact joy that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with making. Nora dragged me to a gallery opening because her boyfriend's cousin was very talented or very connected, same difference. The room was white enough to make people into statements. I stood before a canvas the size of a wall where a landscape had been dismantled into weather, and something in me recognized itself in the gathering storm. You look like you're thinking dangerous thoughts, someone said at my shoulder. She was taller than she'd been in my memory of that sketch, hair pulled back, a mouth that had learned how to smile without apologizing for its happiness. I'm just recalibrating, I said. To what? She asked. To the possibility that I can want something and also deserve it. She nodded, the kind of nod that adds a stone to a foundation. I'm Mara. We talked in the shapeless way you talk when you don't know yet if this person will matter to you in a week, a month, a lifetime, and so your words take small risks, then larger ones. She told me she restored old books, that her hands had learned the discipline of glue and thread. I told her I had recently become very good at letting things burn. She laughed, not at me but with the world. Her eyes were the color of something enduring, cypress, maybe, or the kind of green glass that survives shipwrecks. When I told Dr. Malik about Mara, he asked if the timing scared me. It did. Fear is an honest witness, he said. Just don't let it be the judge. I wrote that down too. The next time I saw Mara, we sat on a park bench and watched pigeons negotiate bread with the solemnity of diplomats. What's your favorite sound? She asked, surprising me with the way certain questions lay tracks directly into childhood. The scritch of pencil on paper, I said. And you? The thud of a book being closed after a good ending, she said. The sound of enough. We smiled at each other like the city had briefly given us permission to be simple. At home, the fireplace in my mind offered a different heat. I stood at the window and decided that the next time I saw Emily would be in a courtroom where names turned into case numbers. My intention clarified itself the way a lens does when the photographer finally stops trying to make a different photo come into focus. I wanted a life that knew how to be kind when no one was watching. The obstacle remained, as obstacles do when they decide they're not finished with you. Late, a message blinked onto my screen from her. Can we talk? Just talk, please. The old reflex lifted its head and wagged its tail. I stared at the words until they were only shapes, and then I put the phone face down, as if darkness could soften a voice I knew too well. I slept without dreaming for the first time in weeks. In the morning, the sun climbed the window again, insistent as truth. On the table, the plant Nora brought stood upright, a green exclamation refusing to wilt. I made coffee and stood in it, the minute where steam ghosts a face, and decided that every day I would build one small thing that was mine. The mediation room borrowed its color from dental offices and quiet dread. A pitcher of water sweated on the table, as if it too were under oath. The mediator spoke in the soothing cadence of a man who has taught too many storms to sit. Papers were shuffled, pens were negotiated, the legal language did its soft violence, turning us into parties, assets, terms. Emily sat across from me, and grief crowded into the chair beside me like an old friend who drinks too much and tells stories no one asked to hear. She looked smaller, maybe the lights were cruel, or maybe I had finally stepped far enough away to see the frame without the painting. When our eyes met, she flinched, so quick I might have imagined it if I were a kinder man. "We're here to resolve things," the mediator said, a sentence that always sounds like a prayer trying not to be embarrassed by itself. We argued numbers the way some people argue theology. On breaks, I stood by the window and watched a man across the street struggle with an umbrella. Wind wanted it to become a bird. Metal insisted on being a cage. The metaphor was so on the nose I would have thrown it out of a story, and yet there it was, flapping. At lunch, Emily approached me in the hallway. "Please," she said, the word thinned out from overuse. "I made a terrible mistake." I remembered nights on the couch counting the minutes between her texts, measuring loneliness like a pharmacist measures dosage. "You made a choice," I said. "Over and over, say choice." "Choice," she whispered, and cried in a way that would have broken the old me in half. The new me was not cruel, it was simply unavailable. "I hope you become someone who keeps what she loves by telling the truth," I said, and returned to the room where our life was being carefully dismantled into piles. Mara did not ask for updates I did not offer. She came with other kinds of talk, about paper grain and glue that has its own weather, about a 19th century atlas whose spine she rebuilt with thread fine as spider silk. She told me to bring her any ruined book, and she'd show me how to take damage seriously. I brought her nothing but myself and watched her hands anyway. We built a ritual around a bookstore that smelled like rain, had a library card. On Wednesdays we'd browse separately, then meet at the cafe and back with one book we thought the other needed. She handed me a slim volume of poems and said, "For when your sentences are too heavy to carry themselves." I gave her a travelogue written by a woman who crossed oceans because a coastline dared her to. The more I wanted, the more precise my fear became. Not fear of her, but fear of becoming a person who expects people to leave because one person left loudly. Dr. Malik called it my cathedral of anticipatory grief, and I laughed because naming a monster gives it a place to sit that isn't your lap. "Let desire have a room where fear is not the landlord," he said. One evening, Mara and I cooked together in a kitchen that had only recently learned where the knives lived. The recipe called for patience and salt. We had both. She reached for a pan, and our hands touched in that small electricity that convinces a body it still knows how to be surprised by tenderness. "Tell me something true," she said, not as a demand, but as an invitation to bring furniture into an empty room. "I burned my wedding album," I said, on purpose. She held my gaze in both hands. "I once tore up a letter I wrote to my father and flushed it," she said, on purpose. We stood there like two people who had learned to say on purpose without apologizing to the gods. A week later, a message arrived from an unknown number with a photo attached. It was a table in a restaurant I recognized, our anniversary place, where the waiter had once labeled us, his favorite boring couple, with a smile. The photo was empty except for a single rose in a vase and a caption, "I'm here, please come, just to talk." I sat with the phone heavy in my palm, the way a small stone can surprise you with its gravity. I did not answer. I put on my shoes and ran. At the river, the water accepted my sweat, my breath, my reasons. When I stopped, there was a bench. I sat. An old man fed the ducks pieces of a roll with such concentration he could have been assembling a watch. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak, it makes room. Emily waited until she could not bear not breaking the silence herself. A letter arrived, real paper, the loops of her handwriting trying to become sincerity. She wrote of therapy and accountability and the brittle angles of regret. She asked for a meeting, not to reconcile, she said, but to put an ending where a wound had been. "You don't owe anyone closure," Nora reminded me. "But if you give it only to yourself," Dr. Malik said. "Closure is often a private ceremony we mistakenly try to hold in public." I held the letter like an artifact from a civilization that once worshipped a god I no longer believed in. I agreed to meet her at a public garden where tulips were busy pretending red was a new invention. The day was clear enough to be suspicious. When she arrived, she looked like a memory that had been edited for television. We sat on a bench and let the flowers do the work of color. "I'm not here to ask for you back," she said, which was both relief and insult. "I'm here to tell you I understand what I did and I am sorry." The apology arrived without decoration. "I wanted to be someone exciting," she said. "I didn't know excitement could be so stupid." "You can become someone honest," I said. "Excitement is easy, honesty is a craft." We sat in a brief truce. "I miss you," she said. "I miss who I was when I thought I was safe with you." I let the sentence sit between us until it realized it did not belong. When we stood, there was no hug. There was only the small bow people give each other when they have somehow both won and lost. I walked away light and heavy at once, the way one feels leaving a courtroom acquitted of a crime no one committed. On the path out, a child dropped an ice cream and howled at the sky, and every adult nearby performed the choreography of consolation, the world reminding itself it still knew the steps. That night, I built a fire in the fireplace of the apartment, a contained, ordinary heat. I thought of the album I had turned to ash and did not regret its death. I thought of Mara's hands and the way thread can teach a spine to be itself again. I thought of my own intention, bright and new, staring at me from the other side of a narrowing bridge. I wanted to love without bargaining with dread. The spring had the shamelessness of a child telling a joke it just learned. Trees threw green confetti, the city tried on its softer face. I woke with the unremarkable certainty of a person who has finally forgiven a weather that wasn't personal. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday that looked like mercy. Courtrooms are theaters honest about their theater. People stand when told, sit when told, speak when told. The choreography soothes those of us who want chaos to have rules. I said my name, my occupation, the date I got married, the date I set fire to my vows with my own hands. The judge asked questions like a person trying to confirm a map still aligns with the ground under their feet. It was brief at the end. The stamp came down with bureaucratic mercy. We walked out strangers with matching pasts. In the corridor, Emily looked at me like a window she could not see through anymore. "Goodbye," she said, and the word went where it needed to go. Outside, the air felt rinsed. I bought a coffee from a cart because small rituals matter. The cup burned the skin of my palm enough to remind me I still lived in a body. I texted Nora a single checkmark. She sent back a string of celebratory absurdities and the photo of the snake plant, taller now, declaring itself a survivor. With the legal ending sealed, the open loops gathered for their reckoning. I walked to the river not to outrun anything but to arrive. Mara was waiting on the bench with a paper bag that smelled like bread, a sacrament we had invented. "How did it go?" she asked, eyes steady. "It's done," I said. "There's a word for this, I think. Freedom," she offered. "No," I said, and surprised myself by smiling. "Room," she nodded, and we ate in companionable hunger. After, she pulled a book from her bag and placed it in my hands. It was an old anthology with a spine repaired in a thread so fine it looked like courage had been woven by a spider. On the first page, a dedication in her clean hand. "For the day you choose making over mending, even knowing mending will always be a part of making." I felt something in me close, like a door gently shutting against a draft. We walked the long loop, and I told her about a new intention I wanted to try on to see if it fit, to love without basing my map on the wreck of an old ship. "Let's build a lighthouse instead," she said, as if it were the kind of sentence a life could accept without fuss. "Something you can see in bad weather." We held hands, two ordinary people making an ordinary vow against a sky that refused to apologize for how blue it was. That night at home, I opened the sketchbook to a blank page. The pencil found my fingers like a dog recognizes its name. I drew a room with a window and a table and a cup, and a book open to a page where a single line waited. I wrote under it, "Write the life you can stand inside." Weeks folded into each other with the ease of pages that have been read more than once. I kept my appointments with the small and the good, running along the river, Wednesday bookstore rituals, dinners that were more conversation than recipe. Sometimes grief visited, polite now, asking if it might sit for a while. I gave it a chair but not the bed. On a Sunday, Nora came over with a cake she admitted she had not baked. We ate it laughing because honesty is the kind of frosting that doesn't rot the teeth. "You seem happy," she said, a statement not a question. "Not the glittering kind, the table kind." "Tables last," I said. A message arrived from Alana, brief as a bow. "We are okay. Hope you are too." I answered with the truth. "I am becoming." Becoming is slow and often unphotogenic. It looks like dishes in the sink and laundry on the chair and the faithful practice of waking up when the alarm asks. It looks like replacing what burned with what warms. When summer leaned in, the apartment smelled like cut stone and bread. I lit the fireplace only on rainy nights, not out of ritual, but because water and fire inside the same evening made sense. Sometimes I thought of the album as it had turned to ash, and I did not feel savage, I felt precise. Some things are kept, some are honored by their burn. Mara and I visited her workshop on a day she said, "You should see what a spine looks like when it's taught to forgive." She showed me thread and patience, the order of steps that comprised repair. "You're good with your hands," she noted, as I held the atlas steady for her. "They've been practicing not dropping what matters," I said. There is a moment in every story when the protagonist realizes the obstacle wasn't an enemy but a terrain. I had wanted safety, and found instead the knowledge of how to keep walking when trust has been set on fire. The climax was not a shout in a courtroom or a dramatic refusal in a rainstorm. It was the quiet decision made every morning to belong to the life I was making. On the anniversary of the night I burned our wedding, I built a small fire, not in anger but in homage to choice. I fed it a single page torn from a notebook filled with plans I no longer wanted. The paper blackened, curled, surrendered, became heat. I stood with my hand out, palm warmed by the proof that endings, done properly, are a kind of shelter. Mara came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "What did you let go of?" she asked into my shoulder. "A map," I said, "and a superstition. What are you keeping?" I looked at the plant on the table, taller, stubborn, green as a new sentence. "The room," I said, "and the light." We stood there until the fire settled into coals, the way arguments settle into understandings that no longer require words. Outside, the city played its endless film. Inside, the apartment held its pulse. I thought of the judge's stamp, of the mediator's water pitcher, of the river and its indifferent mercy. I thought of the first smell of burning gloss and of how it taught me to name what I couldn't live inside anymore. The story began with a promise that broke itself. It ends with a promise kept quietly, daily, to be tender with the version of myself that chose to walk away, to be brave with the version that chose to love again, to be ordinary with the version who makes coffee and waters plants and reads before bed. The obstacle did not vanish. It did not apologize. It became a landscape I learned to cross with decent shoes, company I trusted, and a compass that finally points to a home that is a room I have built with my own hands in the light I choose. I have built with my own hands in the light I choose.